Let's learn how to paint Magenta OSL today. So, welcome back collectors. Today, we'll be painting the Magenta OSL on my Golden Demon diorama. So, this part is really important because it requires very fine control of both values and saturation. And not only that, it takes a lot of brush control to make sure that the light and the shapes happen the way that they are supposed to be. So if you're ready, let us begin. So first and foremost, I'm going to start introducing the colors. I limited the color palette very significantly because in this stage, right, we're going to use just these colors: Chimera White, Chimera Red, Chimera Blue, red shade, Chimera Violet, and then Scale 75 Black. So I got Ivory here from Vallejo. Then this is Chimera Magenta, our main color. And then our mid-tone, I'll be using German Beige. Okay, so in the first stage, we have this model here. What we're gonna do, it seems very daunting because it's all black and we don't know where to start because there are three influencing light sources. And for me, I would want to work on the ambient light first because the ambient light educates us about the situation with the ghoul. Then eventually I'm gonna work onto the object source lighting, and this is the area of influence. Because there are two eyes, there are two areas of influence and they are going to be in magenta. Okay? So they are individual, so I've got to work on them independently. And then on the top, probably a bit of ambient light from the sunlight and reflected light coming from the violet OSL from the bottom left of the diorama, which will influence these areas. This will help educate the viewer and showcase the form of the miniature while it's in the dark. Okay, so I'm going to start mixing my ambient light of the ghoul first because the ghoul is at the bottom. I'm going to add a bit of violet, add a bit of the mid-tone, and I'm going to use a bit of black. Because ambient light tends to be more desaturated, it tends to be grayer, I'm going to just use bigger proportions of German beige and black. Okay, then this is the this is the highlight of the ambient. Okay, so with this initial color, it's going to be a very desaturated violet, desaturated dark violet. Okay, I'm going to start over here. So the idea is to just give the ghoul some form before we work on any of the object source lighting. It's very important because you don't want the object source lighting to be the only source of light educating the viewer, because you will lose a lot of the readability of the model. Why I say this is because with only one source of light, you can probably only illuminate one area and it doesn't showcase every single bit of the ghoul. I'm going to add a bit of black over here, and that's the occlusion shadow because of the hunchback. Okay, right now I'm going to start mixing the object source lighting. So using the mid-tone, a bit of black, a bit of magenta. This will be the initial area of influence. I want to make sure that this area is as saturated but not at full value as possible. And I'm also mixing a little glaze of magenta, so this will influence the shadow colors. Okay, so with the glaze, I'm just going to glaze over the area. You want to make sure there is a glaze, so you got to clean up the areas rather than letting the magenta glaze pull up. Okay, so as you can see, I'm just very lightly glazing over the areas and not allowing this to pull up. And in a bit, I'm going to use a bit of hair dryer to just make sure it's dry before I apply the next layer. The use of this stage is to make sure that the deeper shadows have an influence of magenta in it to make the object source lighting a lot more convincing. This will be a lot more obvious when I start creating the object source lighting in a bit. So I'm just doing the second layer now. Just want to make sure that the shadows are super saturated before you begin. Super saturated in magenta. Alright, Okay, now once the glaze is done, I'm going to use the initial color to start plotting in the area of influence. Okay, so these areas tend to be very near the eye. This level of highlight, you can also consider the reflected light to be part of this, because if the light that's coming out from the eye bounces off the hand and gets reflected on the legs, or it bounces off a rock, gets reflected on the underside of the belly, those are still possible. Reflected light tends to travel everywhere, and which is why I added in a lot of the mid-tone, and black to sort of drop the saturation. Although I want it sort of like high-ish saturation, I still want to make sure that this is not the maximum saturation that it will achieve. Okay, so you can afford to be a little bit more generous with this area. Okay, now moving on, I'm going to make the mid-tone of the object source lighting. So the mid-tone is going to be made of ivory mixed in with a bit of German beige and a lot of Chimera magenta. Okay, so at this stage, I want it to be like super saturated. I want to make sure that the color is as saturated as it can be, because some colors like yellow tend to be most saturated at a higher value, but for magenta and violets, they tend to be saturated at a very low value. So therein lies the challenge, because you want to make sure that the object source lighting looks realistic, but then you are challenged with the fact that the surrounding area is also it has to be lit up. But for the benefit of this school, it's very low in the diorama, so the value tends to be really dark. And what happens there is that with very little value, it allows it to create an illusion that the object source lighting is very realistic without pushing the values too far up. Okay, so as you can see, I might be doing more than one layer here. Okay, because why I need more than one layer, I want to make sure that the opacity of the paint that I've just slapped onto the mini is as opaque as possible to give the illusion that the area is being lit up. Okay, so this will be your mid-tone. After this, we are going to work even higher up. Okay, so we're going to create an even stronger highlight. So now I'm just going to use pure ivory with Chimera white mixed in with again trying to super saturate this color. And because it's starting from ivory, it tends to be of a higher value also. So one tip about object source lighting is that you got to make sure that you know which value is which, so that you systematically work up or down the value chain rather than just basing it on feeling. Okay, as you can see, I'm very roughly sketching it out right now. So at this stage, right, because you are adding layers and layers, you also can increase the readability of the model. You want to make sure that you cover every single bit of volume, rather than you start breaking up every single bit of volume rather than painting it as a single mass. Now, remember in the initial stage, we did it really messily. Right now is your chance to start becoming a bit more neat. Okay, as you can see, I'm doing it in several thin layers, slowly building up the volumes to make sure that the object source lighting starts to showcase how light reacts to the volumes and the materials on these ghouls. And very namely, the hands are very important, because the flesh is the main thing conveying that there is this object source lighting here. Here I am going back to the initial color, the previous color after this, to paint in more reflected light. Reflected light, while not as obvious, it also showcases the how light interacts with the environment. That's why you see the reflected light happening behind the fist. And then at this stage right now, I'm just adding in a bit of white to the mix to create the source of lighting. Okay? So it's been really messy. And right now what I'm doing is that I'm using the initial glaze that I've created to start to redefine and refine the volumes of the entire model. Right now, I'm trying to make sure that this glaze that I'm using is the one that defines, say for example, the shape of the eye, the shape of the skull, and the shape of how the light is hitting the bicep in this model. You want to make sure that every shape is as precise as possible, and you want to use this to start blending down. You want the value between the first highlight, the secondary highlight, to the shadow value. Okay? So glazes can also help to blend stuff smoother. Okay? As you can see right now, I'm doing a bit of detailing just to make sure that every single volume on the hand is well communicated. So that means to have every crease clearly defined and make sure that there's very little room for interpretation. I'm going to put the model onto the diorama to make sure that the values are correct. So as you can see, we've sort of like sketched out the magenta object source lighting already, but we still have not accounted for the violet, atmospheric and reflected light from the diorama. Okay, so we're gonna fix that next. As you can see, it's starting to look very aesthetic, and I'm liking how it's turning out. Okay, so if you're looking for a basic object source lighting, you can actually stop here. But what if you want to take your painting even further? This is where you start listening on. At this stage right now, I am slowly and very carefully redefining every single shape again. I'm doing that by using the glazes again, trying to make sure that the glaze and where it's pulling and where it accumulates is as sharp as possible. And then I'm now using the second highlight to start redefining the volumes, and then you see, as you can see right here, using the third highlight to clean up the shapes. So right now, colors are not so important because they have already been pre-mixed on the wet palette. It's just about going back and forth to make sure that every single volume, every single knuckle, every single joint on the miniature is communicated to the viewer so that there is absolutely no room for interpretation. As you can see right now, I'm also using the reflected light to communicate on this slab that this ghoul is stepping on. And I'm using even the second highest highlight to start to draw lines and draw shapes on individual muscles and the bindings to make sure that every single detail is communicated to the viewer. Okay, once the magenta is sort of done, it's still a sketch right now, we are going to start creating the atmospheric light that is coming from the top few ghouls and the area above this ghoul. So as you can see, I'm mixing blue, magenta and the mid-tone. I'm trying to make sure that it's just slightly more grey also. That's why there's a bigger proportion of mid-tone and black with regards to blue and magenta. And that I'm creating two tones again. So using the darker tone, I'm going to start highlighting and refining the areas which will be influenced by the atmospheric light. Okay. At this stage, the model still looks very messy, but what we really need to be focusing on is that the lights are coherent, so that when we spend time to do the details and we start painting very carefully later, every single detail can be cleaned up. Okay, so I'm focusing on the areas facing away from the object source lighting, right? Using the same idea, I'm also using a little magenta glaze, sorry, not magenta glaze, violet glaze to bind the atmospheric light highlight to the shadow values. Okay, As you can see, I also very roughly added in reflected light in the groin area where the hair is growing from. Really long hairs growing from a groin. Okay. So I'm just going to make sure that the bottom part is experiencing some reflected light. However, the higher part is where the occlusion shadow happens. One tip about the occlusion shadow is that the occlusion shadow, while it is a shadow, it still has color properties, and these color properties will take after the main light source. Okay? So now we're going to start mixing the reflected light. So the reflected bit of object source lighting here, violet tends to be a pretty hard color because I'm trying to get it super saturated while at a mid-tone to low value. Okay, so as you can see, I'm trying my best to make sure that it's super saturated. So using the darker color first, the initial color, I'm just going to plot in the area of influence of the violet light. So what happens here is that the bottom part of the miniature will be defined by the violet light because it influences the bottom part of the diorama, so that the bottom part of the miniature doesn't disappear into the darkness. As you can see, this model is really based in a very dark area of the diorama. You wouldn't want this model to just look like a chunk of grey in this bottom part of the diorama. It lends an opportunity to communicate many more things. So as you can see, this rib cage that he's wearing on his back, the bottom part of the rib cage would very easily disappear into shadows if you don't do this stage. So while working on the reflected light, it's also very important to bounce back and forth and also work on the atmospheric light to balance it off, just to make sure that the entire miniature is coherent. I would like to re-emphasize that coherency is the most important part about object source lighting, because every single part of the object source lighting needs to sing the same story, needs to sing the same tune to make sure the entire effect is very convincing. Because once something isn't coherent, the illusion will just break apart. Okay? So now I'm going back to redefine the volumes. Oops, lost the tip there. Alright, and this will take me to almost the end of this video already. I will be refining this ghoul a lot more because right now it's still a sketch, but yeah, to take it to a golden demon level, I would need to move on to more details, okay? And I'll be covering that in my next video. At this stage, I think it would be pretty convincing as a sketch for object source lighting because it's already starting to look pretty decent. So that was how I paint OSL. What do you think about it? Let me know in the comments below. Also, here are some tips to paint OSL. Always remember value. Value is very important and gives the illusion of light. Always remember the shapes and how the area is influenced by the source of light, and always use some degree of saturation within the shadows to give hints that there is still object source lighting around the area. So if you found this video useful, please like and subscribe and hit the bell notification icon so you will see more videos and when we post the videos. And if you really want to support the channel, please head on to our Patreon and become a patron today. Supporting us on Patreon allows us to keep producing awesome content and awesome videos like this. I hope to see you guys in the next video where maybe I will start working to fine-tune my Golden Demon diorama and many more. So I'll be also starting on Marathi soon, and that's going to be a Patreon exclusive content, and I will see you at Patreon. Alright, see you guys.